Hey guys, welcome back. We are here at the Science and Organic Cannabis Conference 2019. What next? I've enjoyed it. Very excited to watch him. He's an awesome YouTuber, guys. Check out his channel. And I'm going to leave it rolling because he's not, I don't know if they're here yet or what's going on. But we're all getting situated. Everybody's kind of checking in. So I'm just going to leave it rolling. You guys can kind of see who's coming in. And I'm going to get it shared. I hope you enjoy the show because I like it. Oh, please.
I won't be sitting so close in interest this time.
Oh, yeah?
In the back, very interested.
Not close
Well, I
interested?
just wanted to see all the microscopic images of all the...
Oh, yeah, because you can't see from back there. I didn't even think about
it's
that.
not as easy,
Yeah.
so I should get right up close.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Sure thinking.
I mean, it's close imaging.
I really don't like sitting up this
My eyes
close.
aren't that good.
Well, I don't like sitting up this close, but you can hear better, I can see better, and I can film better, so.
And there's a bit more space, too. Just sitting in the rows, you're kind of like...
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I think I'm going to go get a cup of coffee before this thing totally gets going.
This will be a good one.
Yeah. Totally excited. Have you guys followed him on YouTube?
A little bit. Actually, one of my business partners has been following him really closely. It's not until I heard he gave away 150,000 plants that it really kind of sparked my ears up. Oh, yeah, he gets it. He knows what's up.
Yeah.
Out there that talk about genetics, but then just kind of hoard them. It's like, well, that's weird. It's not.
Yeah.
It's like everything you're talking about, what we should be doing, you're doing.
Yeah, that's right.
Fucked up. Yeah, buddy. Let her know she can shuffle this out of her way if she needs to. I'll let her know. Yeah, just don't close it. Okay. Jared. Jared. Yeah. Jared. 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 Hey. Nice to meet you. Where are you from? Cool. Yeah, you from Saskatoon? Oh, right on. Yeah, I didn't know there was anyone east of here. Okay. Yeah. It's actually, I guess, closer. Yeah, Florida was closer. Yeah. Are you growing up? Yeah, just done my own medical for a few years. And, in the process of setting up a micro for a wealthy cousin of mine. Nice. So I'm just a kid in a candy store right now. Right. Get to essentially build the facility I could never afford. So yeah.
Trying to find someone to do it.
Yeah. Well, then just kind of just keep shaking hands and let people know what you do. There's people that want to invest in cannabis, and a lot of them just kind of want to say, here I want to make some money. I don't really want to have any involvement in it. So you do you. Yeah.
That's awesome. Saskatoon.
Yeah.
What's your
It's called Fexter Cannabis. FEXTERN.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're in it.
Yeah, and it's probably better to follow me personally. I mean, you can follow both, but yeah, Fexter Cannabis. I don't have much content up there yet. And yeah, just my name is L-A-N-E. Britain,
Oh, right there. Yeah, that's awesome.
Right on. It's a new number.
Yeah. Right on. When do you think you'll be up and running?
We want to get the application in within a month. It's slow though, any of that stuff.
Well, just for my medical.
Yeah, they're pretty hardcore with wanting to know everything about your facilities, security clearances, and operating procedures and stuff like that. But I'm very fortunate to have a lawyer that works with me. He got me out of I don't know if you've been to, you may have heard there's 2015 at Bakery, the dispensary in Saskatoon. Anyways, I was the only dad. He's a close personal friend of mine. He got me out of all of my charges. He knows everything about cannabis law, and now he's doing constitutional challenges for the dispensary and stuff. And he's my application guy. So I just said that I would never have the skill set to do. So it's a really good team. We just work with whatever investor wants to start something up, whether it's a nursery.
Hey guys, I was over getting a cup of coffee, not sure who's checked in. Hey, K-Doggy, Octocom, what's going on, guys? Good day. Can you guys share on Instagram? I can't actually share on Instagram. But here's the schedule.
Yeah, for a lot of these growers, right? Like, we don't know that stuff. Same. Yeah, and like his first degree is commerce, so, and he's a young guy, young lawyer that really hates the man, and he's in it to help the little guy kind of thing.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah,
And he's back from BC too.
actually Calgary originally, so yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, man. Just go for it. I've had a bunch of friends do that this year. I got a close friend who's a grain farmer way out eastern Saskatchewan. He's like 15. He's just been messing around out in his backyard and he's original lemons gone. Europe. I don't know if you've read that was DNA or whatever, whoever invented lemons gone. And then just a rider. And he just threw those out in the backyard and let them do their thing and pollinate. And every year he would just keep the strong ones and volunteered and self-germinated. So at first it wasn't very many, and then he'd take the two best ones and let them do their thing. And just year after year, this variety got stronger and stronger and stronger. And we call it very skunk. And hating on it, I think we just haven't done the breeding yet. Like, this thing grows 5-6 feet high. It's big around. It's dank. It's really dank. It'll take 2 or 3 frosts in the spring and in the fall. It's like it's prairie proof. Yeah, I'll give you a handful of beans. So I had, so we call it like a semi-auto because it's like a low-auto. It's a 68 plant. This thing, you put it up when you put your tomatoes right before frost. So it's like 90, 100 days. It gets big. It's really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, that'd be ideal for climate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I just right now I just do my rooms at nice. Small, 2-4 by 8.
Nice.
Yeah. I just recently found that I'm on my first one.
Awesome.
Yeah. Doing pots and stuff like that before. Just gets better. Yeah. Originally I did hydro. Actually I stopped doing that about 3 years ago. And yeah, I just said,
You're learning the law of like what we do, or what they told us in the grocery store, you know? I need 3 bottles, okay.
so yeah, getting out of the gross.
Yeah, they're selling you help.
It's basically Afghani lineage, but Afghani hemp, and then there's something else that you put in it. Good smell of that. Yeah, there's a bitter in there too. And white. Yeah, it's Sarda. I forgot what the other carrot was that you put into it, but it's got more, like for me, it's got more of that star look, white, you know. And I like herbs. It'd be like, I'm a earthy, gassy kind of guy.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. Yeah, I bought everything. Yeah, I'm just writing down a list and they're interested in. I don't know.
I just call myself.
Oh yeah, yes. There's a lot of Hollywood stuff, right?
Yeah. I'm not
No, he's got some beautiful biodynamic herb.
Hey guys, come on, grab a seat, everybody. We're gonna hop. Come on and sit down, guys, and end your conversations if you can. Most of you guys in here know who Kevin Jokeri is. I'm just so stoked to know you, Kevin. It's been a blast. I entered a Terp festival in Seattle in 2015. And that's how I first met this guy. There's a panel of knuckleheads up there. And there's this one guy with long hair who just kept saying real shit. And I'm not used to people saying real shit. And I was just like, man, and then, so I just kind of went down this Kevin Jokeri Google world. And I've just been, man crushing on you. And learning so much. Thank you for what you give to our community. Kev's a big giver. And that's what I caught the other night was his success has actually come from his heart giving. So.
Thank you so much for letting me be here. I didn't expect to be part of this group. I'm not known in the same way as a lot of the regenerative people. These are people that I follow, so I study underneath them. I respect what they do. When Josh said, hey, do you want to be part of this? I said, that's not what I'm really known for. I don't think I'm qualified. And he said, no, what we want to have you do is talk about genetic selection and maybe get together with breeders and start to give people ideas of how they got to where they are and how we can all as a group get here. And you are in the same situation that I'm in that I'm in California, and some of you guys are from Washington, Oregon, East Coast, but all of us are really craft operators, which just means you're about the plant. And your desire is to cultivate superior cannabis. And the money is something that comes with it. It's an essential component, but it wasn't the primary driver. And the people that we're competing against, it's the polar opposite. It's the primary driver. And for us, we have an advantage in the fact that we're basically non-competitive in being cool with each other. And that's important because you're going to have to share the information and share the genetic material and share the resources and share the mental IP. I love that word, IP. Just like proprietary, like you invented that shit. It's something that we have to be able to use together in combination. And so when it comes to genetics, it's one of the most polarized topics, I think, in cannabis because all of us have this extremely intimate relationship with the varietals we work with, and we may all agree on some things, but we're like, this is mine and it's better than yours. And in reality, that's true because you've selected your genetic package to fit your needs. And when it comes to the topic of genetic selection and what we do, I think for a lot of people, we're going to go over it in a business sense, because if it's for your personal usage and you're just here to say, hey, what are we doing, then any choice you make is correct. Nobody quantifies value to you. And if you're asking a rapper or a celebrity what to smoke, you're lost because they don't know what the hell they're doing. And you want to be able to relearn how to have faith in your decision process. And I think a lot of people have had that removed where they've been taught that they're not intelligent enough to make a decision for themselves. And in cannabis, we really still have so much of that. But as we go into this new world, we start to question our decision-making ability. We start to question our understanding because we feel threatened by the people that we're competing with. And they're doing a really good job laying some propaganda out that it's impossible to compete with them and that you're just going to have to just lay down and capitulate. And they're just going to roll over the top of you like you're a piece of cobblestone. And the truth is, it's not true at all. And what you have to be able to do is define the market. So when it comes to genetics, it's your market. Who do you intend to sell to? What is your desire? And you have to really start to work on how are you going to get your product to those people that you want to move this to. And that means that, are you a concentrate maker? Are you someone who grows biomass that's going to get turned into distillate? Are you someone that provides varietals for specific purposes? Are you in medicinal genomics where you're trying to create packages that have very specific impacts on individuals? And as you start to create that narrowed field of focus, it starts to let you say, okay, now that I know who I'm moving it to, where am I producing it? What's my location and my tools, my skill sets? And that starts to really create this necking down of what we do and what we work with. And what happens with genetics is that you start to get confused that because you have 50 cultivars, you think you have 50 different cultivars. And as we start to genomically look at these, we realize that they're interrelated. But people consume cannabis for a desire of an experience. And what I'm going to lay out right now is a way that I use to define categories of cannabis. And I laid it out for a competition that I created. So I created this competition to highlight light depth when no one was doing light depth. And I was involved in so many other competitions with other people as a judge and as like an advisor that I didn't want to bootleg anybody else's methodologies. So I didn't want to steal from the people I knew their judging criteria, how we quantified this stuff. So I went home and I said, hey, how would I do this? What I wanted to do is I wanted to use laboratory analysis to be able to create a competition where you had to be at the most stringent levels I could find in the US. So when I originally did it, I looked for lab analysis out of Colorado, then it went Oregon, Washington, and then California finally when we had regs. Because what it did is it allowed the cultivators a chance to play the game legitimately. It wasn't to out anybody or make anybody feel inferior. It was that if you're going to be in a competition, you might as well be in one. Or otherwise it's a feel-good competition. So it was the first time any competition in the US had ever been done with the lab to make sure that you were at a level of cleanliness and conformity. And then because I've judged the Emerald Cups for a number of years, you know, sometimes we get 1,200 entries. And my cup, the one I created, is the second largest in the US in terms of entries. Bigger than any High Times Cup, bigger than any Dope Cup. So we were able to get, you know, almost 250 cultivators to enter consistently to be part of it. So we're not larger as a big show, but in terms of sheer entries for cultivators, it was genuine because the cultivators understood what we were trying to do, which was create this situation that the people who made it into the top 16, the winner of it, actually got coverage. They were able to be highlighted and showcased to say, look, you're the best of the individuals who are doing organically based light depth production. So we used the laboratory, and then I said, well, let's take the laboratory and make it so that we can get down to 16 entries instead of, you know, 250. So the first qualification is you got to make it through the testing to make sure you're clean. Then the second one was we said let's go with terps and cannabinoids, so that kind of gets us net. But then it becomes a potency high terp cup, and that's not real in terms of experience. Meaning that when you smoke cannabis that's 8% with 2.2 on the terps, it might be some of the best grass you ever smoked in your life. So numbers are important for extraction in terms of ratios that you have to have in order to make extraction valuable. But it doesn't mean anything in terms of experiential cannabis. But you have to have some criteria to neck a cup down. So what I did is I created categories of entry. And I've been trafficking grass for so long that I just saw this pattern that cannabis to me broke up into fuel and earth, fruit and floral. So I broke it up into these 4 major divisions. And it allowed you to enter in the floral, the fruit, the earth, and the fuel, because fuel division is always where you have your highest numerics. And then floral is where you have your second highest numerics, and then fruit, and then finally earth. And so if we were to use varietals that are commonly known, we would say something like a Super Lemon Haze is a floral, a Tangy is a fruit, a Bubba Kush is an earth, and any of the nasty OGs fit into the gas category. And what it did is it allowed me to have an entrance point for individuals who wanted to compete, and we were going to use numerics, but we were going to have them enter in those categories, these complete earths, cannabinoids, terps, and not have to worry about, so say that would be like a 14 and a 2.7. It wouldn't be completely wiped out in the numerical analysis on a fuel that was 30% with 5.3. So it would let me get into the judge's hands these different clusters of how we see cannabis from someone who was a career distributor. And it broke up beautifully, and it made sense because it allowed individuals to enter cannabis into an event that was going to be numerically driven, but it wasn't about the totals combined, it was the totals on each individual category that let them compete head to head with the judge. And then the judge would then be able to choose the one they liked the most. So the top 16 all got noticed. I didn't make you quantify order, and I didn't require you to reveal your selection. And I brought in not only professionals from the industry, but I did a random where I brought in the ringer, where it was people who would come to the event and you'd spin this giant wheel and out would come these gold balls, and we would whisk you and your friend away to a private location where you could be part of this nasty judging party, and then we would drive you home when it was done because we knew you weren't going to be able to function after this. And it was funny because someone said, well, they're not qualified to judge. And I said, really? They're not qualified to say they don't like your pot? And bottom line is the ringer is the most important person in the room because they're the ones that just choose based off they like you to do, they not. They don't go through and say, oh my God, the polish was incredible. They said, that was good grass, not bad. We would ask you, do you want to be part of the judging? If you did, you'd spin the ball. If the gold ball came out, you got whisked away for the day. And so we're happy with this event, and I had this team of scientists from UCLA approach me and said, what makes you think this is correct? And I said, intuition. I believe that when I look at cannabis as a broad picture, I see these 4 categories kind of come true. And he said, do you have any scientific proof? And I said, no, I don't need any. I own the competition. I'm using it as my own criteria to create a simple platform that lets me get what I want done. And they said, well, we're going to challenge you scientifically on this, and we're going to use all the data that you have, and we're going to try to see, does this make sense? And lo and behold, they came back and said, you were absolutely accurate. And what they found was that there was this correlation between limonene and carotene that if we put, so I don't have any slides, I'm a technical Luddite, so I could barely program my own phone. So no slideshow from Kevin. What we're gonna have here is take a box and then draw a line from the corners so that you cut it into 2 triangles. That's a linear line, up 1 over 1 progression. If you take almost every varietal that we have today that's in the market and you lay it across that line, and you pull myrcene out of the equation, because myrcene seems to be it's almost like a degradation holding. So when we pull myrcene out of the grouping and you lay it across this gradient, almost every varietal you see in the industry today falls across that line in a limonene-carotene ratio. So that's what the scientists were able to pull out of this data. And what that means is that, and they created a company from this, is they have a patent on this stuff now, so they're gonna be able to start using it, and I was happy because I don't have the ability to do all that other stuff. I'm busy doing the job I do. But what I wanted to have happen was I wanted to have an ability for customers to come into a facility and say, I would like something that's mentally stimulating, or I'd like something that's in between, or I want something that's sedative, that isn't your opinion. Because as smart as we are, we're focused on our own opinion. So your choices might be accurate, but not across the board. And so we wanted something that wasn't arbitrary. In California, you have companies that put their own arbitrary rankings: sleepy, sedative, ethereal. Based off of what? Based off of whoever stuck it in the jar. So it's not accurate, and what it does is it doesn't allow you repeatability. And I wanted a repeatability, and I wanted an ability for cultivators to be able to form their own genetic libraries so that they would have a chance to be able to cover a broad spectrum of markets. And so what we do now is we grow, I'm growing 6 varieties and they're all different. But when you plot them out, they're not that different. And so the problem is you're clustering all your production potential around some very specific markets, but you miss out on other markets that you could catch. And so when you take a look at these ratios between limonene and carotene, it allows you to have an accurate indicator for the consumer. Because ultimately that's what we're here about, is we're trying to be able to produce cannabis that we sell. And we want to be able to have the consumer make an adequate decision, one that they can make and then say, ooh, I enjoyed it, or I would like it a little more throaty, I'd like it a little deeper, or I'd like it a little less powerful. And they would be able to utilize this system to be able to determine it. And so when I set people up for farm work, I work off of those pieces, because fundamentally the fuel is aggressive high, earth is a sedative, the florals are more contemplative, florals are where the tech industry utilizes it, and what's that? And then the earth is relaxing. What do you got?
For the limonene carotene relation, is there any public or peer data on
Yeah,
that?
that'll all come out next. And so there's a company, this is Dr. John Abrams from UCLA, and they're going to release this thing called a Cannabis. And it's going to be this system that you're going to be able to utilize. And I have nothing to do with this. So like, I'm somebody that got challenged scientifically by it. It didn't mean anything to me. I don't have any stake in the work, but it was quantified by Abrams. And then the other day I was watching the news, or cannabis related stuff. And it was a scientist from Switzerland, and he also said, hey, we found out that cannabis breaks up into 4 major groupings. Now, he broke it up into carotene, limonene, myrcene, and terpenoid. But the bottom line is it breaks up into these same basic divisions. And what it does, it allows you as the cultivator to be able to create a portfolio of genetics that run in those ranges. And so if you're trying to create for yourself differentiation in what you do, you want to make sure that you can cover those markets. And I always use the 7-gram example, where someone would come in and buy a 1/4 ounce from the dispensary, and you and your farm would have 7 1-gram jars, and it would go from very light cerebral to very sedative. And you could bring that to a party, and you'd be able to then expose people to these different pieces. And what it is science is now helping us understand what we've done and known for a long time, but it's also allowing us to create much more accurate portfolios of plants that we work with. And then when you're getting into your breeding work, you can breed for specific situations, but you'll also be able to start to find people who work those other directions and start to collaborate and find the product diversity that you need to fit along these ranges. And so now we understand how we want to break up our portfolio in terms of experiential use. And then it starts to go into what is the impact on these cultivars from your production methodologies, because it's going to have changes. You're going to pick up subtleties. We talked the other day, they talked about using grape waste as a compost item. So where I am in California, you got a phenomenal amount of grape waste. And when I used to do the Emerald Cup, I would note where on my sheet did I taste common compost, meaning did I think the base inputs were similar? And I would mark all of these, and then at the end of the competition, I would go find out who was the maker of the compost, and we'd be able to say, hey, the same guy made those 15 entries worth of compost, and it impacted them tremendously in a positive way. But at the same time, when you have an impact from these type of inputs, it also changes the perception, because the cannabis is an accumulator. And I had someone hit me up the same question: do you have scientific proof that cannabis picks up those flavonoid profiles? And I said, I don't. I said, I'm just somebody who's moved a lot of weed, and as someone who's been in dispensary operations for 11 years, and nursery operations in legitimate form, and then illegitimate form nursery operations for decades, and then production for decades, and now legitimate operations for years, I have something called a cash register that allows me to use this magic tool that lets me know the truth of the sale. And so it helps me understand that there's definitely a difference in that people perceive it as better, and we know that the varietal picks up these inputs, and these pickups that you receive change the perception of it, and you start to be able to say, I got you. So you get a cultivar from you let me have something, and I produce it, and it's nowhere near as good as yours. And so we start to say, well, I'm not as good a cultivator. But what we find is that when you selected your plant, you selected it for a north face, which means it doesn't like a lot of sun. And so when I selected it, I put it in full sun. And so I burned off all my monoterpenes, and you didn't. And so yours is a much terpier, sexier package. Mine's kind of dry, and it's just lost its attractiveness. Same cultivar, both of us did a good job, your selection situation. So what you're trying to do is create this package of selection, and then start to find out how do we optimize that particular plant for what you're doing. And so for all of us, we've shared genetics tremendously. I mean, cannabis genes move around the globe. And someone says, this is unbelievable. What you want to find out is what made it unbelievable. Where did you cultivate it? I did a selection video to help people understand this, because a buddy of mine who's a phenomenal indoor cultivator and outdoor cultivator from Oregon, because Oregon's market is so unbelievably competitive, he removed all the DE lights in his room, and he went back to single-ended bulbs. And it was because he couldn't get the quality that he wanted out of those DEs, and I realized it was because the plants had been selected under mobile socket bulbs. That the selection process you used determined where the quality was going to be found, and when you change the variable, you change the equation. And so you're going to use this information, this earth, fuel, fruit, and floral, as a basic guide of how we can look at it, and it's been challenged scientifically, but Ethan Russo, who you probably know, he and I are friends, and he's just like, that was amazing, because he's like, you took 42,000 terpenes and you stuck them into 4 boxes, and it worked. So we have agreement from people who are competent in this field, and I always tell people, look, don't be a terpene memorizer. It doesn't make a difference, because everything that you study on terps is based off aromatherapy. Once you burn that shit, it's no longer applicable. And any minor terp affects major terps in a radical way, and sometimes you can even change terpene packages and not notice the change. So when I do R&D for companies, sometimes I was doing humic acid work with someone, it changed my pinene and my humulene levels, it inversed them completely, and it should have had a radical change in how we tasted the product, but there was none. So sometimes you can change minors and have no impact. Sometimes you change a minor and you have major impact. And a lot of it is to find out what was the optimization that made that varietal incredible. And so when you're doing, if you're looking at cannabis competitions, whoever the winner was, you want to be able to get all this data from them on how did you optimize this varietal so that you can repeat this process. So if they had some unbelievable effect and you loved it, you bring it to your farm and it doesn't work, then you're able to start saying, okay, where am I supposed to put this plant? Where am I supposed to utilize it? What was the inputs they used to make this shine? You're gonna find that even though I think biologically based cannabis just crushes cannabis, sometimes it's not the right methodology for the varietal because the varietal was chosen under chemical means. And that the selection process was optimized for that. And if you look at cannabis today, you're gonna find that a lot of the indoor is so nutrient hungry because we only selected stuff that was nutrient built, that we optimized the situation and overloaded it, and the ones that were able to survive and go forward now have that in their genetic predisposition to desire it. And it's the same with plants that were selected under pesticide, fungicide additions, to where what you've done is you've created varietals that can no longer exist in today's world because we can't use these things and we should never have used them. It's just that they were tools that we used heavily, and they influenced the selection process from the cultivators. And if you don't utilize all the tools that they use to get that product, you have a different product. So what we really need to do is kind of go back into these gene lines that we're working with and start to bring out stuff that's designed to work in the environments that you're using, and then find the production methodologies that make that varietal shine in the way it does. And if it doesn't shine, discard it. You have to be honest about it. And I think for a lot of people, they get so emotionally caught up that they produce the grass that I'm like, it's nice, I'm glad. You're gonna smoke 700 pounds of that shit. And they're like, no. And I said, then it doesn't matter. For you as an individual to consume, anything you choose is correct. As long as it was biologically based, you're not destroying the world producing it, and you are creating a product that has all these incredible nuances that can only be picked up from this biological interaction between the plant, the earth, and sunlight. I'm a sunlight fan, even though we utilize mixed light for operations and we have full indoor for nursery operations. For me, there's nothing that the plant balances out better than natural sunlight. And so that is my favorite methodology. But in real life, a lot of people only have a 400 watt light in a closet, and I never negate them for that, because that's not cool. That's not cannabis culture. But in real life, for producers that we're at, it's a little different level. And so what we're trying to do is find varietals that work in the methodologies we're using. And that's why conferences like this are incredible, because what it does, it lets you connect people in an informal manner where we all get to meet and see each other. And you start to make friends. And that relationship lets you start to find out, what did you do to do this? Someone gave me this gorgeous flower today. So I brought it up as an example where I said, that is some nice pot. And the question is, what did you do to get it to this level? Because if I was to receive this in clonal form, could I replicate it, or would I get it to this situation? And so it's not just receiving the flower or the plant, it's receiving the information, the mapping on what did you do? What did you get? I saw some really nice flower last night from you guys. There was some good grass. So I went through the jars and went through a bunch of them, and there was some really, really nuanced smells, and I didn't get a chance to smoke it. I had to go to bed so I could get up on time. And I know when you're old, man, you got to go to bed earlier. And so, but I'll go hit some up today. But the thing was, it was this incredibly beautiful, rich mist. But the thing is, you would have to be able to say, hey, we grow it like this, but these are all the companion plants that are around it. These are the things that make these influences. These things drive these terpene levels higher. When we move it to another location, another farm that doesn't do that, it changes it. Which one was the best one? And a lot of times we take it as who's the best cultivator, and it becomes an ego competition. And it's not really that at all. It's really about trying to get the data from what you did to make this thing optimal. Because with genetic selection, I'll use Mandel's Royal Kush as an example, right? So the Royal Kush is a tremendous number of varieties are coming out of that right now. But Mandel was this, he was a nut, man. I like Mac. He was just a nut. And he had a coastal operation, so it was about 13 miles or so, from maybe even like 10 from the ocean, but it was low. So he received this really foggy, cool, dangerous situation for dense cannabis. So he did a massive sift out of probably like maybe 3,000 plants outdoor there in Albion, and he pulled the winner. And so it has an ability to produce very high potency cannabis with a really unique, loud terpene signature but on a really tight, solid bud structure. So that what you get is you get bag appeal. You normally can't grow stuff like that in those foggy environments. It has to be a much looser structure so that it's open, so that it ventilates. Any of these denser flowers like that usually will rot. So Mac nails this thing. He comes up with this, he nails it. And so I hold the clone, and he ends up getting in some trouble. And he has to take off out the country. He loses a bunch of his stock. When he comes back into the US, I was holding all this material still. And I said to him, I said, hey, I still have all your parental stock. And so I gave him back the parental stock. So when I tell people, everything you touch today from the royal line comes from this plant, I know it does because I'm the one that gave it back to him.
What year is that?
Mac did that work, let's see, he died probably 3 years ago. He did the breeding probably 13 years ago. So when I met him about 11 years ago, we had operations down the street from each other. We had some warehouses going back in the day, and we were down the street, and he was coming up with his own organic lines, where he was starting to work on trying to get organic suspensions. And I got introduced to him from a nutrient company that he was trying to work with, and we met, and we just got along. And so, 13 years ago, he comes up with this, and it was a good varietal. But right now, anybody who's using these royals in their seed lines, that's the magnum opus. That's $800 a pack, and I think that the shit's piracy personally. But because I'll give you the clone that he made it from, and I'll give it to you because the bottom line is you need varietals like that if you're in these coastal situations that have an incredibly attractive terp profile, and a beautiful bag appeal, and a really nice quality high. But what we found was that because I'm a nursery operator too, and I've been doing nursery work for a really long time at a large level, it lets me see what happens when you move plants into specific locations, and it's nice to be able to see the same plant in a line of latitude or longitude. It lets me see finishing times, and it lets me see influence on temperatures, different than most people get to see, because most people don't get to see a single cultivar spread out over a state. And what I found was anybody who was running these varietals and anything that had a hotter night temp, the plant was never able to replenish that monoterp signature, and it was muted. So still gorgeous cannabis, still had all the qualities, but nowhere near that attractive signature. And so with genetic selection, you may have had some of the nicest grass you ever smoked, but when you move it into the interior, you lost that terpene profile that grabbed you so much. So you still liked it. The sesquiterpenes that you get when you're burning it, the ones that could hold up under temperature, was still present, but not that monoterp that when you open the bag, it just emanated out and caught you. And so lo and behold, my friends that ran it on the interior were like, hey, we don't like it as much. And so you put that in your notes, and you got a question.
Yeah, on the royal line, so was there anything you noticed like, in terms of botrytis resistance? There was nothing, normally like you said, it's more...
Oh, excellent botrytis resistant, PM resistance too.
Was there anything structural that you noticed, or it was just something that was different in the tissue?
Genomic, you have to, and that'll get mapped. So right now, if you're looking at marker-assisted breeding, so I'm gonna go to that one real quick too, because this CRISPR shit scares me. So marker-assisted breeding is different. Marker-assisted breeding is scientific breeding where what you do is you note outliers. So we note these outliers that have, and we're going to just use it for fungal resistance so we make it easy. Anytime you're talking about selection, bigger populations, less traits of selection is better than smaller populations, many traits. Because you really want to be able to make sure you get what you want. And then you can start to narrow those down and create lines that have that as a trait. And from that line that has the trait, we start to look for all the other quantifying factors that make what we want. But when you're trying to smorgasbord this shit, you just don't get what you really want. And so the first marker-assisted projects that are happening in the US are they're identifying markers for PM resistance. And so they're gonna go in, they're gonna find outlier plants. So I have a collection of plants that have incredible fungal resistance. So we grow those out, and then they can take a look at them on a genomic level and figure out what's the indicator, what's the marker on the chromosome that says this thing has resistance. Now we have that as an identifying marker. So when I make the progeny from that plant, I can go through them at juvenile stage, and I can test the leaf sample and say, does this have it right now? And it starts to let me get populations put together quickly so I can start to be able to get myself a homozygous trait for that so that it breeds true for that. That's marker-assisted breeding. It's how we breed wheat, it's how we breed corn, And it's scientific breeding, but it's not GMO. You're not adding a fish to your cannabis, because that's what GMO is, dissimilar organisms melded. You're really just taking a look at the plant and identifying where the identifying points are that you can use to help you understand, to refine a breeding process. And that's a wonderful tool, and anyone who's in breeding now would love to have access to that tool, because it helps you build your lines to satisfy a need. In this case, it's going to be PM resistance. But we could work on the ability to hold monoterps in high desert climates. And so Central California has exceptionally high temps. You end up having very dry cannabis. You flare up all these oils. You'll be able to start to find out which are the ones that didn't do it, what marks identify that, how do we then hold that so you can build regional specific lines, varieties that work in specific climates, cold resistance, varieties that work with low water usage, varieties that work well in biomass production, because you notice that it has giganticism as a trait. And so that's genomic breeding, and it's, don't be afraid of that. You be afraid of it because you can't afford it. And that's the issue, is with the cost. And then it takes about 10 years to really do a project correctly. And by the time you're at the final stage of the project, you're looking at millions of plants to choose your breeding pathway. But there's nothing wrong with that. It improves lines. Yeah.
I know that tech's kind of grabbing hold of the industry quite a bit. There's a lot of people who are trying to put that tech into the hands of like personal breeders, personal producers. I've heard about like MyCanna DX for terpene and cannabis.
And Orange Phytonics makes one too. But what those do is those are more pheno selections. And to me, I'm somebody who I was involved using laboratories for 11 years in terms of cannabis work, and then I was able to use soil and leaf laboratories prior, because one of the guys I did work with owned a great lab, and so I would just give them the material unmarked, so they would let me understand that we were actually feeding the living shit out of these plants, and that we were driving them into a level of plant obesity is what I called it, and it made them unbelievably susceptible to pathogenic problems. So I knew this a long time ago from using that type of analysis. And I get into cannabis analysis, and we can start to see cannabinoids and terp levels. That shit was the worst thing that ever happened to weed. It was, because what it did was it made everybody instant genius on paper, and nobody really experienced the cannabis anymore. So you were so busy looking at the numbers that you didn't look at the experience of the flower. It's a drug. It has to be used in experience. Unless you're extracting it for mass, and you need a terp extraction process to get specific level of terpenes derived economically, or cannabinoids derived economically, then that shit doesn't matter to the user. What happened was they marketed it that stronger is better, and people believe that if it's stronger, I'll be able to have a less of a dose. And the way I always explain to people is that really your terp is your direction. So the terpene levels are the navigator, take you where you want to go, and then the cannabinoids are the throttle, how hard you want to go within it. And so you can have a higher experience, but it doesn't mean you're going to consume less of it. It just means it's going to be more intense. And so that education didn't come out in conjunction with the lab analysis, because the lab analysis was this. To me, science is wonderful, but we misuse it. And we use it as a substitute for common sense. And what takes place next is the re-education for people to understand that these numbers serve purposes as a diagnostic after the fact. It lets you consume something, and then you look at the labs and go, oh, I got you. I like stuff that's these ratios, these totals, these profiles. So then it lets you kind of understand when you go someplace else what to expect and how to use the information that storefronts give you. But to me, information only helps you on those very specifics. They do not help you with marker identifying anything.
Is there anything out there that would help the smaller scale farming?
No. And you need brains and money and labs and time. And the average cultivator, as intelligent as I think cultivators are, they're busy cultivating. And so it's really difficult. So what you use is you use these boxes to help you find the outliers in terp levels and cannabinoids. But if you're looking for, resistance, you're going to still have to look for resistance. You're still going to have to use your intuitive skills as a cultivator. And you're not going to get around that. And nor do you want to. Because once they replace you with robotic cultivation, what's the point of being here? So that is marker-assisted selection, and it's used in all forms of agriculture, and it's very effective and very efficient. It just makes it hard for smaller cultivators to operate, because when they're able to release things that have higher potential for resistance, greater growth rates, ultimately it's as a cultivar, that's cultivar we're talking about, the chassis. It's kind of hard to beat the chassis. The chemovar is another story. That's the integration of this with the cultivar, bless you, so that you end up having the satisfaction of the end user. And what we have with CRISPR technology is genetic editing, where it's a shortcut. It's where we can come in and splice in new material. And I always give people the same analogy that you are going to make a movie. And when you make a movie, the director has a vision of a film. And they want to be able to create this picture. So the vision of the film is the total genomic package. And the editor is someone who takes that 10 times amount of film that they shot and they edit it down to the movie length. So the editors are really good at chopping up a movie. And to me, CRISPR technology is you shot a movie, you brought it into the lab, and the director didn't sit down with the editor, and the editor made the movie. And they just chopped it to pieces and said, here's an hour and 20 minutes worth of movie, except that when you look at it, it's missing all the pieces. And there's no story, and there's no continuity, and there's all the things that you wanted to have, they left those out. When you do gene editing, you're chopping things out, or you're chopping things in, but the problem is genes aren't light switches, they're complex, and so as you edit something out, you can easily edit out things that you did not understand you were editing out. And we had a discussion the other night about, could you change cannabis into something that wasn't homeopathic? Because cannabis, for some reason, when you consume this carcinogen, because it's burning material, how come it has such a profound effect on lung cancer? How does it have all these unbelievable homeopathic properties when it shouldn't? Because in its genomic makeup, it does. And we're not smart enough to understand that. And so my concern is that you're going to get in here and you're going to CRISPR up some pot that goes big and goes fast and does this, and you're going to release this crap into the system, and it will get out. And all of a sudden now you have an infiltration of that material into your genomic material. And what we've done is we've taken away the entire ethnobotanical history of cannabis as something that is a supernatural plant. The question is, are we working for her? I mean, it's the most widely distributed, widely cultivated plant on the planet. So are we the ones in charge of it, or does it have a higher level of consciousness as we define it? When I was younger, I was like, that's bullshit. As I get older, I realized that I had a very limited New England view, because that's just where, and I realized that I wasn't looking at the picture correctly, and I just said, look, I don't know enough to have an opinion here, so I'm just going to shut up and let it roll as it does. But you have a couple of people in California that are CRISPR weed right now, and my fear is that you're going to get this material into our genomic pool. And so when it comes to doing the work that you're doing, a lot of it is to make sure that you're working on your lines yourself and you're preserving genetics. I'm someone who breeds cannabis, but I'm not a breeder. I'm always tied into breeding. But what I really am is I'm a genetic sorcerer. And people go, oh, you're a wizard. I say, no, I'm not a sorcerer. I'm a sorcerer. And I laugh because I don't catch it. You know, I'm like, no, I source the plant for the specific application. And that's what we're talking about here, is being able to understand how to get an array of products and then how to select the right product to fit the target destination, and be able to work with other individuals to create lines that work that you can preserve in your own genomic form so that you have material. And on a lot of this stuff, if you can, like this Beth here, is an Open Cannabis Project, it's the idea that if you can get this material stamped in some sort, it allows you some form of potential defense against these patents that are being produced. Plant patents that are broad open patents, they cover a big swath. And so all of a sudden, you know, your cannabis product is confiscated, or you're having to pay a royalty to someone. And if we can get this material stamped and dated and put into play, it starts to say this material was in existence before you worked on it. And it starts to give you a defense. For me, my breeding situation is I like to preserve lines I play with. I'm a seed order, but I share my stock. But I like to preserve things that I think are beautiful. I like to go into lines and see if I can find something that works more specifically. But to me, a breeder is someone who sells seeds as a business, or your primary function is that you work off a seed form. And that's not what I do. I'm a seed preservation individual, and I sift through stock. I work with other breeders. I do projects with breeders. I develop males that have exceptionally high ability to throw numbers. And I'm not a number freak, but I'm someone who has a cash register, and the cash register says that shit better register, or you're not going to sell it on the shelf. And so for breeders I know that had beautiful lines, but the numbers were low, I would go and put males together, and I would cluster them through predicative analysis, and I would just put together pools to where I started bringing out higher numbers consistently over my package until we had a male that was able to throw an extra 8 to 10 points on top of something. So when I throw it on a 20, I get a 29, and consistently. So that's the kind of stuff that I do as a breeder. My friends are breeders, where they're working their lines and they're moving them through time, and they chase direction, and they can say, this is the parental stock we put together, and my dad gave me this and I did that. That's not what I do. So I always make sure that I'm clarified on that, because breeders don't get a lot of respect. And breeders have to have a vision that is down the road incredibly. My skill is in market interpretation. I'm someone who historically knows what moves and what doesn't. And that's what I get hit on mostly for market analysis. And so even giant LPs from Canada hit me up, and the monsters in California about, could you analyze the market and tell us where the directions are going, what is hot, what is not, what do you see the future in? And what it does is it lets someone who's in the game do it. And the reason why I work with those type of things is because it allows you to quantify your directions. If you are only living in a vacuum, that's all you know is the vacuum. So you got to test your theories. You got to put that shit on the table and see if it works. And so if I can play at this level, then I know that my directions are right, because fundamentally the direction is the direction. And that way what we can do is we can take this proved information and then utilize it. And that's why, you know, for me, this conference was such a beautiful thing to be part of, because what you have is you have all these brilliant individuals who've achieved success in their own fields over time that are able to talk about how they got there and where the common information is set and where they have differences of opinion, so that you're all able to see this picture. So, you know, for me to get up on here right now, a lot of this was like, hey, understand that you have to create a library. You have to create an array of products, otherwise you're just a single product. As soon as you saturate that one market, you don't have any other market. So what you want to do is you want to get people to be interested in you as a producer, not just your single product, but you. You're your brand. There's no brands in here, not a single brand. There's not a single brand in cannabis. And people argue that all day long. And I did a consult for a $7 billion alcohol company. And the owner of the company, this old, gristly, gnome-looking dude, he had ears twice the size of normal, balling out of human control, you know, owned a $140 million winery. I was laughing. I asked him, I said, well, what's it like to be you? He goes, I get $1 million a month in straight cash as a paycheck. I said, that's nice. And he said, and I'm running a $7 billion company. I own a $140 million winery. When we unload this company, I'm going to take a slice of this thing that'd choke you. So his financial success was overwhelming, and he was a liquor god in American liquor. This guy is a liquor god. So he finds me online and contacts me, and I go and hang out with him. And a lot of these guys that are massive, they want to hire me to do consulting. I won't let you hire me. What I do is I make you work out where we're friends, and you're the only person I'll talk to, so I won't talk to any of you workers. So what it does, it makes me talk to the guy on the top, because only the janitor and the owner really do anything. Everybody in between doesn't do shit. So the janitor, I want to talk to the janitor because they're working all the time, and I want to talk to the owner because they built the damn thing. And if you're not the owner or the janitor, I don't really want to deal with you. And it allows them to have a different relationship with you because they have to respect you because they can't buy you. So the only way you're going to get the info is if we play. And so the game that you play is let's trade info. And so when you're getting info from people that are running these massive operations, they're frighteningly big, it lets you understand the reality from their perspective. And his perspective on branding was that in liquor, if you can't be in 45,000 stores at one time, you're not a brand. And if you can't be in 45,000 stores tomorrow, you're not a distributor. So he's like, if your distributor can't fill 45,000 stores every day, you're not a distributor. And if you're not big enough to fill those stores, you're not a brand. And so what he said to me was, and this isn't the center of Humboldt as the only brand, but in the US, he said Humboldt's the only brand because it's the only known name that resonates through the country. You guys are in BC, Kootenays, that's your brand. And in other states, your areas where you have these production little spots, that's your brand. And what you do is probiotic, organically based, regenerative, that's the brand. It's because what it does, it allows you all to team up and utilize that combined power to be able to produce common products. That's the champagne model. Now grape cultivation to me isn't clean, but the champagne model is 4 different varietals, 1 production methodology. That's it. You want to be in Champagne and grow grape and get put on the Champagne appellation? 4 varietals, 1 methodology. Who adds the value? The house. The processor adds the value. It allows every small farmer in Champagne to get paid because these massive houses that are billion-dollar companies will buy your product because they need it, because most of them don't grow the grape. They're the house. They use your grape. And so with the genetic selection we're talking about, it's trying to find varietals that work in specific situations. And then you figure out how you optimize them and find out who can grow those, so that what you have is you have the ability to achieve the levels of cannabis needed to be in 45,000 stores. And in California, we have a store issue too. You guys have some different problems here, and all the states have their own little nuances. But none of us are at the end of the game. We're just brand new. So for all of us that were historical, it's like it's the end of the world. But really, it's the beginning of a whole new book. I call it the New Testament, Old Testament. So we're in the New Testament. Doesn't mean the Old Testament doesn't exist. It just means that now we're in the New Testament. And so we have to be able to understand that in the New Testament, you're working off, you have a broker between you and God. In the Old Testament, you dealt with God direct. And so now you have someone with a license that does your distribution for you. And there'll be other licenses that do the other components. But the point is that as producers, craft producers, genetic sources, individuals that put packages together, the idea is to get enough of the material so that you're able to keep a customer happy for time. If your product is on the shelf for 3 months and then it's not there for 9 months, do you think they're going to remember you? People don't give a shit. I mean, be crystal clear. That stuff has to be there. In the dope game, which is what I used to call what we did. I still like those phrases. People get angry. And I'm like, no, it was better. You missed the sale twice. There was no thrice. So if I didn't have product today, you can forgive me. I don't have product tomorrow, you find another dude. And if I have to go and then figure out how to win you back, I gotta work really hard to do it. And that's time and effort and money and resources that we don't want to have to spend. And so it's only in conferences like this that you can have these conversations, because like, I wouldn't go to a Live conference. I wouldn't bother. I would talk to the owners of those companies in private, but I make them come to my office. I make them fly to see me. If you want to talk to me, I won't come in. Because what it does is it normalizes these people to where you can actually have a conversation with them. You have to play patty cake with these guys. They've got that giant Hulk fist. You ever see that Hulk fist you put on, that giant fist? That's their patty cake hand. And I don't want to play that game with them. So if you make them come down to your level, then you can actually have a normal conversation with them. But if you have to go play at these conferences, all you have is an ego fest and everybody talking about how much canopy you got, and, you know, what do you own? And it's such a weird conversation that you have to really just basically turn your back to it and go. But in here we can have this conversation because all of us are really dependent on each other to actually succeed, because most of us share genetic material in some form. This stuff's not so individually unique. If we genomically test it, I bet there's some related stuff somewhere. And that's a good thing. It means that we're connected. It's a bad thing. It means we've truncated the population. So the cannabis varieties that came over from like 68, same thing in Canada, you guys were ducking the Vietnam War up in the hills, which you should have done. California, same thing, 68, a lot of the veterans in Bay Area moved up to Humboldt County. Humboldt County was logged, they destroyed the area, property was cheap. So you could buy cheap, tore up property, and it became a hippie fest. And these people said, hey, we want to bet on counterculture life, we're gonna grow a little bit of herb. It started to become a burgeoning industry. It was beautiful, 83 comes along, cops come in, helicopters come in. All of a sudden, it changed what was grown. Outdoor was no longer the product. So we went into indoor only. 78 was pretty much when the broadleafs came into existence. So the first time any of these older guys saw broadleaf stock, we would call that banning, 78. And so but it wasn't big enough to make it worthwhile for cannabis then, because you could go full sun outside. So you didn't want to grow a plant that was 2 feet tall, you want to grow one that was 11 feet tall. And those varieties were selected for ethereal usage. Anybody that's on the 0 to 20 is choosing stuff for a high level of mental acuity. You have plenty of water, you have a better quality of life. You get up into 30 to 40, man, you're in some of the worst places on earth to live. And so that's where CBD genetics comes from, right? When I go look through the Pakistani populations that I get from Pakistan, just CBD rich. Because people needed more medicinal cannabis because their life was hard. And so they chose cultivars that worked in those environments, they chose chemovars that worked in those environments. We took out the cultivar and the chemovar in the 80s, and it started to compress these gene pools, and it started to create bottlenecking. And this bottlenecking is now at an extreme level, and so we have a microcrop facility, and because of it, it lets me, and I would tell people I'm not a scientist, my mom was a scientist, so I understand scientific process, but I'm a field operator. I'm the black sheep of the family that didn't want to go to school. I wanted to get in the game. And so I spent my whole life in the movement of it. And so I never pretend I'm a scientist, but I surround myself with bright people that are, so that I can benefit from their knowledge base, because we would never be able to spend the time to understand. And having scientists and laboratories that you can work with in such easy access lets me know that on some of these varietals we work with in families, and say, like, well, use the cookie line because it's so hot. When we're testing out these cookie lines, we're getting almost like 60, 65% of them got fusarium in them that we're pulling through. That's an incredible proportion of a family to have an issue. So we have to do meristem, scrub it, and then nodally propagate it to go forward to get rid of it, because we have these bottleneck lines. And so all of you that are holding all this material, the less connected it is, the better it is for resistance purposes. And it's the ability to meet and connect with each other, to be able to say, hey, I have things that aren't connected to you. You can actually start to work together, because what you're doing is you're not collecting all the genes in a single package. You're having the ability to have resistance that you don't recognize, that's inherently provided within the genomic form from centuries of survival. And so a lot of this stuff is trying to form your libraries and then figure out the methodologies that you need to optimize it. And that's where, when you talk to your friends and say, who's got the best grass? And is it because they have the best varietal, or the best methodologies, or the best location? Are they combining all the features above? Did they have a companion plant that drives their terp levels in a way that made it attractive? You need to find out what they used, because none of you are competing with each other. And so that's the thing that has to be driven home here, is that none of you are competitors. You're not big enough to compete with each other. If you can fill a couple stores for a while, that's wonderful, but you're not going to fill all of them, and you're not going to be able to do it year round. None of you. Even the LPs really won't be able to a degree, because fundamentally they're producing too much cannabis to be able to be put on the shelf, and so they're going to get degradation, because that shit's going to sit. So they're not going to have a velocity of movement, and flower cannabis degrades. You guys have a really good market on ice hash here, different than we do in the States. Ice hash is a dead end. Very limited sales through a storefront. California is about oil. They about oil. That place might as well be Texas. And they really, really are about it. And so when I have friends that say, hey, I'm going to blow my whole farm, and I'm going to buck the trend, and I'm going to go ice hash, I say, you got to go bankrupt. You're going to go bankrupt. Don't do it, because you're not going to get enough extraction potential to make it worth your time to be able to drop the price to a level that's attractive to the customer. Where here you have that ability, so you guys can select incredible hash varieties. You mentioned that you choose open varietals with high hash levels on open structure plants so that you get the most amount of trait density combined in extraction potential. Problem is that you throw those open cluster plants into the California market, most farmers don't box it. They're not allowed to because they probably don't have that permit. So you typically can cut it and dry it. You might be able to process it and trim it if you have that permit and that structure. But you probably don't have a manufacturing facility permit, which means you have the industrial commercial real estate required. So it's a huge situation when you're not the one who moves the product. In wine, people compare wine and wheat all the time, but they're different. And they're similar and they're different. So you can't use the wine model as a direction completely. Don't overlay it over the top and say it's wine. People are gonna pay $1,000 for this because they will. It's different. And it's a state, meaning that all processes are on site. So a state means there's a level of quality control of your product. When it says it on the bottle, estate grown, people don't usually know what that means. They think it means, oh, it's grown on your estate. It means that all the processes from growing it to bottling it were done by the same crew. And that's the problem that we're having right now, is that for all of us that were craft, we controlled all the operations. So we controlled the cultivation, we controlled the stabilization. We call it curing, but curing is a process and it requires some very controlled parameters. So really, you're not really technically curing it. I call it stabilization. Yes, it does cure it in the way we perceive, but that word, I had this discussion with a guy that dried lumber for Louisiana Pacific. He's drying all the lumber on the East Coast. He's drying Purina dog food. And he was like, you ever open a bag of dog food and see mold? And I said, no. And he goes, that's because we dry it. And I laughed and I said, oh, I got you. You know drying. And they said, yeah, we know how to dry things. And they came to talk to me about drying herb to figure out how can we create these portable chambers that you could put on farms that you could solarize, so you'd be able to harvest your cannabis and put it into a container and have it hold a constant temperature and bring the humidity down over a 2-month period on a linear gradient. That's curing. And so, and did you do that? Did you go into those control mechanisms? No. What we did is we just did it by feel. And because we were about the quality and the experience of the end user, we had a good feel for it. Well, the problem is that you're no longer in control of that part. And then we had our own trim crew do it. Mechanization was a no-no because it not only did it damage the flower, but it oxidizes it and it browns it prematurely. So if you're not moving it, you know, what do they say, like shit to a goose, and it sits, it degrades and oxidizes and goes brown, and now you're moving brown pounds. The brown pounds are dramatically slower in velocity and less quality to the end user. So hand trimming allowed you to have the ability to really hold flower in a much more healthy manner, and biologically produced flower doesn't degrade. Chem flower breaks down radically differently. So biologically based cannabis holds, hand trimmed holds, you handling the drying and the curing holds, and then you would then throw it in whatever sack you threw it in, and off it went. So by the time the end user got it, they got some really good product. But for us, we need to find varieties that don't have open structure. That if it's going to break up in the bag at all, you're the problem. Because it's going to be crumbles when they open up that jar and dump it out. Because you're going to have 3 different companies handling your product, and to them, it is just a product. It's not what you spent the season doing. It's not this reflection of this incredible emotional connection to be a cultivator, which you have to have. You can't be emotionally disconnected from it. It's like, to me, plants, animals, and people, you must have that within you. Anything living. If the shit's inanimate, it's a widget. Do whatever you want with it. But if it's not a widget, you're not going to put it on a shelf, then you better have an emotional connection to it. I'm not looking for a robot to babysit my kids. And the problem is that's what's taking place with cannabis. And so part of this, and what's this tangent I'm going on, it's that if you're not in control of these operations, you've got to choose varietals that can hold up to people who don't give a shit handling weed. It had better have a high holdability. You better have exceptionally high lipid levels in these plants, waxes that hold, because otherwise by the time they finally get it to where it's going to go, it's dried out. If it doesn't have high waxiness, it dries, and when people handle it and touch it, It's not the same quality. So you see all this cannabis at stores that's craft cannabis that's turned into crack. And the LP is even worse because, or for us, I call it the investor-grown dope. It's the same thing. They're squirting chem through a spitter and running this stuff through a machine, and then having some other machine pour it into a tube, and they show you a picture. I call it Instagram pot too. It's some of the best looking grass you ever seen when they took the picture. But if you smoke that stuff, it's like smoking a diesel stack. So
And radiating it.
yeah, they're radiated here. But where we are, it's just they don't make us go through some of that procedure like that. But holy stuff, you're selling visual cannabis. Visual cannabis means nothing to me because fundamentally we're not buying it to put on the wall in a picture frame. We're buying it to consume. And so your genetic choices have to reflect these realities until we get to a situation where there's a more knowledgeable understanding of an industry. In California, the industry is tax driven. So the tax revenue is what was desired. Every process and control mechanism backwards is designed to feed that. It's not about creating an industry, it's about creating a tax revenue. So once you understand how they create this type of situation, it makes it easy to understand why there's so many people in line. Well, over the course of time, when they don't achieve their objectives, which they won't, they're going to have to modify the process. And large investment groups and large companies can afford that. They can bleed money for years. That's what's called the oligarchy model. The oligarchy model is we're gonna financially go to war with you until you're all gone, and then we're gonna take by pricing you out of existence. And then we're going to raise the price. So when you go to the gas station, there's many gas stations, only 3 refiners in the U.S. And on the West Coast, you're buying gas from one company, and they just throw a label on it, and then pour some additives into the jug and say Shell. It's all coming from the Exxon refinery in Richmond. Same stuff, same base material. They just move it. And so that's this model that you're competing against. And what you have to be able to do is get your genetic collections and start to build them and start to refine them and start to get your data put together. But realize that you're not always able to release these things that you'd like to into the public. I have varietals that are 8 and 9% that are gorgeous, and I give them to people who want to smoke with, I would say, older people or those that haven't been saturated with cannabis for the majority of their lives. Because what I want to give them is rich, full flavor and beautiful experience. I don't want to blast them out of their shoes and scare the shit out of them. It's like giving people edibles. If you're going to give them edibles, you're going to microdose them, or it doesn't work. And it's the same with cannabis, but I can't put that 8% variety on the shelf at all because the numerics are still in charge. And you have to be able to understand this stuff with your genetic work. So it's not that the stuff that you have is invaluable. It's the opposite. It's priceless. It's just about getting the material, getting some of it mapped so that you have some form of data that says this is in play before you actually get to use it. And I'm in my 50s, and I intend to do this until I'm dead. So a lot of you guys are way younger than me. There's no difference. You're going to be here. A couple of years seems like a long time, but it's not. You'll blink and you'll be gray. You'll blink and you'll be old, and you'll be like, wow, that was quick. It's just that when you're taking a financial ass kicking, it seems like 100 years. And so what you have to be able to do is realize that the genetic material you're holding is priceless. It's the only thing that the LPs, the investor groups really want from individuals is they want to acquire your genetic material. Whenever they buy a company, they buy your genomic material. They take all your material. They're not just taking seed stock, they're taking sifted cultivars that are proven that work, that have high marketability. You have these in your hands because it's what you've used to survive all these years. You want to be able to hold these materials, get them marked, get them into a public situation so that you're able to use them in the future when these situations straighten themselves out. And they will over time. All industries do straighten out. But in the interim, it's about making sure that you have a product diversity that can move to multiple people, that you have varietals that can handle the truth that they're no longer being handled gently through their life cycle. And what you end up doing is you typically end up relying on distribution to move your product. And I tell people what you have to do is go to, you guys will have a little different situation because your store levels are so low. But in California, the farmer has to go to the store. Farmer can't sell the product. Farmer's got to go to the store and meet the people, meet the tenders, and expose them to these varieties. so that they can start to educate people on what craft cannabis really is and the differential. And if you talk to the buyers and your numerics are correct, the buyers will find distribution to work to get the product into their stores. And what you want to do is have the varietals that you're working with that are what I call interim. They're things that will work right now. They're things that will hold, they won't break down, they're better at production value, they have this high value because your production methodology will be better, but they're not your shining star of what you want to release, because that has to be handled by a group of individuals that have tender hands. If you're able to work in conjunction with multiple people, you have enough people to create production standards that let you use common genomic form, common methodology. You find someone who's a quality processor, quality packager in your cluster. And that way what you can do is you start to create these higher value brands. And bottom line is it's the genomic form that has the value. The greenhouse I go to, same greenhouse. I got one. Same shit, no matter where I go. I go to indoor, look at my state-of-the-art indoor. I'm like, I have 14-foot ceilings, and you got a 10-foot spread, and you got a preview controller, and you're spitting into rock wool, and you got a really sexy litter, and look at my incredible water filtration system. You need it, because you're in the city, and you got pH 8.3. Well, yeah, I'm sure you have this stuff, you know, but the bottom line is they're cookie cutters. What they have is that. But the thing that they don't have is quality genetics that really grab people. They have Instagram, bud. And I always tell you, grow that shit twice. Purple Punch is popular, as someone was telling me. And I laughed and I said, who? And, I mean, it looks gorgeous, but smoke it twice and tell me you actually enjoyed it. Because the first time you smoke it, where's the punch? There's nothing to this. But it couldn't be any better looking in a bag. And so the thing is that those Instagram weeds that these people sell, people buy it because they have to, but if you notice, the black market's doing pretty damn well in every area where there's legal cannabis. You know, it's mind-bending. I tell people the same story about legal cannabis all the time. In my first trip to Washington to do a lecture, I get picked up by a driver, and Washington just went legal. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna go buy my first legal bag of grass in my whole life. So I was excited that I was gonna buy a legal pot for the first time. And I tell the driver, take me to a store so I can buy a legal pot. And he goes, why would you want to do that? And he pulled over on the side of the road and opened the trunk. and I was in tears at a collection of herb, and he was like, how would you like to smoke? And I said, what do you got? And I bought a bag off of him, and it was like, I got it for 100 an ounce instead of 400 an ounce. And we were cracking up, and I said, this is unreal. I said, I'm coming to Washington to talk about legal weed, and the first thing I do is an illegal dope deal. And it was better grass. And I was just like, oh my God, because there is such a disconnect with the quality of perception. And what makes all of you strong is that you've had intimate connections with the end user of your flower. You've created products, you've nurtured the products, you've been able to refine your process, and you've been able to refine your genomic forms. If you're a breeder, you've taken it in directions that you believed worked, and if it sold, it did. And lo and behold, now all of a sudden we're negated and we believe we don't have any skills, and we're told that we're not accurate, and that when we come up with genomic pot, it's going to be better, which is using those MyDX and Orange Phytonics, where my truck levels are higher, my numbers are higher. Exactly. But when's the last time when you broker about in a black market deal that anybody asked for a lab report? Never. Yes.
So as far as you're talking about connection with the plant, how many of these people do you talk to that go, oh, but I don't smoke it, but they're willing to get in the market?
Most of them in the modern world.
Yeah.
The only ones that, and for them, and I even say this to people that are career producers, where are you good at selling it? Because there's a disconnect there, because I got buddies that can move freight train loads of weed, and they're honest, and growers hate them, because they're like, shit won't move to this price. And they're like, yeah! And they're like, no, I'm just trying to be honest with you, it won't. And so what you have to do is you got to figure out who in your group has that ability to ascertain quality and value and accurately. And they'll be able to tell you, this stuff is a mid-grade product at best. Yeah, I know it's this and I know it's that, but nobody wants it because it doesn't do this. It doesn't have this. It doesn't have the longevity. When you lit it up, yeah, the first hit was great. I had hot after that. It had no sesquiterpene base to hold it. Are you burning it as a concentrate? Well, you can work with that because the mono is a concentrate, and you'll be able to pull out these nuances. If it's flour, it better be there. If it's not there, it's not there. Same thing with lower potency flour that you blow. It'll reflect it numerically to where people don't notice the change in potency. But when I work with guys that are extractors and they get caught up in this, I do recovery projects where I'm obsessed with going back to my youth. Not because I want to live then, but that I was fortunate to be in an area that trafficked large amounts of cannabis. Everything was trafficked there. But I saw an ungodly amount of cannabis that came in from all the other countries in bulk, all through the year for years. And I saw that change to where we no longer get cannabis from these other regions. And because of that, to me, we're smoking muddled pot, where a lot of it's kind of similar, it tastes similar, but it was not that in the past. And you had radically different profiles, and you had radically different experiences when you consumed it. And it was really something that I go, whoa, was I imagining this? You know, is it like we get caught up with nostalgia? But when I bump into somebody that says, been holding this since 78, and you consume it, you go, wow, I went right back to that time. Who cares what the numbers were? The effects are just phenomenal. I'm old enough now to where I want to go back and I want to recover varieties that make me happy when I smoke them. I've gone the whole ride, man. I introduced BHO in Elmo County. I was the largest dealer I was the largest seed dealer on the West Coast. Like, I did all the stuff that was business related. What I want is I want to go back to smoking really good flower that made me feel good. I'm not worried about getting like I'm really high. I want to get really high in a really lucid manner, or I want to have something that's extremely sedative but balanced. I want to see cannabis that was selected for usage, not just production and sales. And the older cannabis lines really reflect that to me in that form. And since I'm an older dude, I'm like, hey, I'm going back to my youth. Well, everybody I talk to that's an extractor is like, oh, I love that. We'll be able to move that. We'll be able to do that. What you got to do is you got to lay one of your males on top of it and get the numbers back up to 26. So then it makes sense. And I said, well, once I do that, it's not the same product anymore. And so what they want to be able to do is put the word landrace or old or vintage or something on a package when it's as far from it as possible. And that's a reality. And so, you know, I tell people that there's a market for the 50 to 70-year-old, and traditionally it's white male. So you might have, 15% female from that era. But mostly I see it in my own research as a 50 to 70-year-old white male has disposable income and has consumed cannabis long enough. They're the buyer that you want to sell an ounce of good grass to, because they'll buy an ounce of good grass. And in California, in the dispensaries, $5.50 in SoCal was a good price for like a top shelf piece. But if it was quality for these people, they pay $7.50. Yep. So when I'm doing my market research and I'm playing around with these guys, I'm like, what are you really doing this for? And I ask the guys that buy it, what would you pay? Because I go find those people to talk to them and ask them these questions. No answers. The thing is, people would pay these numbers for things that were quality, but they can't get them in the store. Yeah.
Do you think that plays along more with the relationship to wine? That kind of market? You said there's differences. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, well, with wine, yeah, it's disposable income on wine, but the thing with wine that makes it different than herb is that wine was something, just with all alcohols, all ferments in general, is that there was so much contaminated. It's funny, there was so much water contaminated in cities because they didn't have good sewage, that if you didn't drink a ferment, you basically had contaminated liquid. So if you go back to Rome, they drank more wine than they did water. So it has a different connection because of the amount and why people utilized it. And cannabis used to have that in these other areas, Asia, Africa, parts of South America. But once the drug war came in, we wiped that shit out completely, and we stigmatized it so heavily in so many places that we changed that dynamic completely. And so now we're going to have to recreate that component. And what I see is, in California, I see the wine groups trying to monopolize their ability to sell a product, market a product with their cannabis tastings, and they expose you to these things, and they know how to do all this. I laugh because I'm like, I've never even smoked weed either. but they know how to paint the picture really well, and they know how to go after these upper level clients, and they know how to make the money off the pieces. Those are some really limited markets. People think that people with money buy pot, and they don't. They buy cocaine, and they like pharmaceutical opiates, and they like expensive alcohol. They don't like cannabis that much. Cannabis is a blue-collar drug. If you're really moving cannabis, it's basically blue-collar people, people who work, people who would rather substitute cannabis for alcohol. Cannabis is something creatives like cannabis. The tech industry, computer people love cannabis because they're sitting in a chair uncomfortable and they need to be able to code all day with some kind of mental stimulation, but they want their body to not feel pain. So that's a new group, but it used to be all the mill workers, the auto workers, the fishermen, everybody who had to work and function. Drug addicts, and made them out to be dysfunctional. And so you broke that group out, and then it becomes, cannabis becomes everybody in cannabis. So when we look at prices on the shelves prior to legalization, they were high, relatively high in some things, because who's buying them? All the growers. You know, we were selling oil, we were selling 7 grams of BHO, we called it the player pack. Because my son laughed, he goes, you're gonna come back and buy it anyways, you might as well buy it all at the same time. And it'd be 7 grams of oil for $700. And we were moving that shit. Because they were going to smoke it, they might as well get it, and we were making sure that we were curating extremely good products. Well, as soon as the growers lost all their disposable income, I don't see that happening anymore. Player pack went away. Nothing more like the beggar pack. And you're seeing these changes, and so it's the who buying the product. So the first thing we talked about, this is all about genetics, but genetics to me, and I say it, people they're like, whoa, but they're your partner, but they're a tool. They're the tool you use to enter a market. But to me, they're my partner because I'm working in conjunction with the genomic form to achieve the penetration of the market. So who are we selling to? If you have an ability to go to storefronts or be able to build branding values, utilize this type of organic methodologies to where you can work together and combine your resources for advertising, then you're able to go after a little more discerning group. If ultimately, if it's a higher quality product, people are going to want to choose that higher quality product if they can be exposed to it. Wine is still mystique, and California wine is radically different in terms of big money because what it is it's ego. So wine was wine, and then California wins a competition in the 70s that says California's equivalent to France, so everybody's happy. And it was so valuable. It was valuable, but not like it is now. What changed was the tech industry became hyper wealthy. And San Francisco Bay Area is basically money piled on top of money all the way up to the sky like the Tower of Babel. Well, they have so much disposable income that they have the ability to buy wineries and lose money on them and write them off as a deduction against their other incomes. So they can have a killer winery and they can have parties and show you their wine label. But when I go to Napa and Torrey, they'll tell me you're getting $7 million of value off of that size plot of grape in that house. That's a perception. That's not a reality. So the problem is when people talk about high-end wine and people buying a struggle, but the ability to be able to identify your markets. And so what I learned too is that you can put a lot of focus on your environmental concerns and your ethos, and you're going to attract 2 people out of 100. And I told a story the other night, and I said, I had to prove this to someone who had a really hard time understanding that price is still king. And she said, people care. And I said, they don't give a shit. And I said, I'm trying to tell you, the majority of people don't have enough cash to care, and those that do are rare. So I said, let me show you a really good illustration of reality. And I took a pizza box, so a big white pizza box, and I drew a skull and crossbone on it. And I wrote the word toxic weed, and I wrote $10 off an eighth, and I put it in the window of the dispensary. And I said, now we're gonna sit here, and I'm gonna show you the lesson of reality. And people poured in there and said, which one's the $10 off one? And then they would say, how toxic is it? I'd say, covered in fungicides and pesticides. And they'd be like, I'm okay with that. And I watched them get out their phone and call their buddies, hey, this shit isn't bad, I'm looking at it right now. $10 off, and safe. And that just means that we're trying to preserve forest land, we're trying to preserve the terpenoid habitat areas, which is important to us, because we live there. We're caught up with this shit. Because to us, it's not shit. It's the very quality, it's the thread that ties your life together, which is the fact that you're living this healthy, holistic life, because you're like, hey, that's a life. Sell that to somebody. And so I'm honest about it, you know, and people get angry because they're like, oh, you're just about the money. And I'm like, no, I'm not. What I'm about is I'm about surviving first. And then we can work on getting the education to get the people. And so much of this is to be able to find these cultivars that satisfy, have diversity in your product lines, be able to share the information to figure out what methodologies produce best, because none of you are competitors. We used to be competitors in our minds because we were egotistical in a sense, right? My shit's better than your shit. The truth of it is we have to dump that mentality instantly, because we're not competitors, we're collaborators, we're co-conspirators, we're RICO Act. We're all the RICO Act together. And what that does is it allows you to be able to utilize each other's skill sets and share the genomic forms and identify, was the market satisfied? Do I have an ability to produce your product in conjunction with you so that we can make sure that we build a market that demands it, desires it, and moves forward? Stuff that's hot. The two hottest ones right now, the hottest stuff in California is the Mac 1 strain. So I got it. It's $100 an eighth. And it's out. You cannot get it in a store. $100 an eighth. You cannot hold it. Goes to the Emerald Cup. Same thing. $100 an eighth. And I have the plant, and it's beautiful, and it's chunky, and it's really, really powerful. But it's all right. It just has all the things the market wants, and so I don't worry about whether I like it or I don't like it. I just know that at $100 an eighth, and it moves like vacuum cleaner sucking it up. Put it in your portfolio. The GMO, same thing, is 85 an eighth. Can't hold it in any of the stores. Those are the things that you sometimes have to have in your portfolio in order to make sure that you have some penetration. That product connected to your farm starts to give people an identification of you, and then you can start to introduce them to other things. Then you can start to be able to educate and bring them forward. The person who figured out how to get the product best, so I see 5 guys grow it, and I go, my buddy did it best. What'd you do different? I kept the temperatures in this range, and it seemed to make it just explode with this sheen. Anything different? All of the variables held constant? Yeah. One change made it that. The other guys need to know this, because none of you are going to oversaturate a system when it's that high a price. And what you're able to do is you're able to work together with material. This is some good herb right here. This will explode in California. So the thing is, him sharing it with a couple of people that are farmers that have comparable conditions and similar situations isn't a bad thing, because what it does, it allows you all to move that known name variety that you've identified, and then get market penetration, and then get consumer desire, and now you start to have faith and trust, and that's why they buy it. Brands, good brands are visual image, mental image. It's not denotation, what it is, it's connotation, it's what you believe it is. So where it said to you, what's a dog? You're like, I got a German Shepherd's a dog. I like pit bulls. I like Chihuahua. Well, that's all connotation. Denotation is, it's a mammal on 4 legs that digs holes and chases bones and pulls its stuffing out of your couch. That's the thing, and that's what you have to understand with cannabis is the same way, is that these beliefs that the customer has, you have to identify. You have to be crystal clear about it. You have to be able to produce enough cannabis. And someone said here, you guys are on these, 1,000, 2,000, some smaller plot sizes for craft micros. That's not enough to run a year-round cycle and satisfy a market. What you want to be able to do is tie in with each other and get together as groups and start to refine your process and put your ego down. So one of you is the organic wizard. There's always one person that's really good at that thing. Someone is the master of, let me do the process. I'm really good at market analysis. I know what moves, but I'm like, I should have moved. And I know it because I can take genomic forms that I find, and I can introduce it into a system, and then there's tons of it being produced quickly. That allows me to work with breeders because they know that if you give me material, I don't take your fame. I let you get that credit. Well, my job is to get pot into the hands of growers who can then sell it. I need people to help me. I don't screw you on the identity of where it came from. What that does is it allows individuals who consume the product to know that this product was derived from this farm and this breeder or these groups, and then it allows you then to have that penetration. So if people want to know what I'm doing, I'm like, well, if you put 20 tons of herb on the street, they'll know it was you. That helps. 3 people smoking your shit, nobody knows who you are. 3,000 people smoking your shit, they know who you are. And the only way to do that is to get combined farms working on these methodologies. And then you're able to start taking the data and sitting down and saying, look, this varietal kills it, doesn't do it at altitude, it doesn't trigger quick enough, and the cold slows it down at the end. This one doesn't do well in anything on an interior because the heat gets too high and it flashes off the quality. This one cannot handle the wind. So if I put it in a windy environment, I lose half my production because windy environment cannabis drops the production dramatically. It radically increases your wax levels. So stuff that you want to be able to use in all these forms, you have to kind of understand these things and then understand how the inputs impacted what you're trying to do. And the only way to really do this is in these collaborative fashions. And they don't have to be formal, they can be loose, it can be with the crew you're rolling with now. But if you're able to kind of go into a little bigger picture of it, then it starts to allow you to be able to find the varietals that you need in the portfolio. And when I talked about those 4 categories and these limonene-carophylline ratios and how they actually will be used by companies to go forward, it'll allow you to be able to find, hey, I don't have something to fit this point on that graph. Let's find the cultivar that works. Who has a similar situation to me? You. Who has a similar production? You. Which one works? This. Now you have it. And now it allows you to be able to get these forms moved out, so you're not just going after the gas guys. People didn't understand prior that people in dispensaries don't buy a 100-pack. They don't buy a box. They buy a bag. So you're not able to just produce monoculture and then release it all. Sometimes you have to have some diversity. I don't recommend you go too diverse because ultimately what happens is you're having to work on optimization for too many different things. And for us in California, it's expensive with batch testing. So I start running multiple things, I'm paying multiple tests, and I'm having a redundancy that I don't want to have. I want to be able to get into an affordability. So you start to figure out, if we want to have a product array, then you grow one thing, and 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 it gives us 4 different things that we can commonly brand, commonly push. Each farm gets the connection, but you go under a cooperative type labeling system to where you're able to utilize the combined skills, tools, marketing, but you're using each other's platform. Now you have an ability to be competitive, because ultimately they're going to keep throwing this shitty pot at us. But the more that it's moldy and the more that it's dry and the more that it's flavorless, the more the black market still thrives, which proves that people do care. The belief with cannabis is that nobody cares. That's the assumption that they all made, and they made it with us too, that we're not intelligent, we're not hardworking, you're lazy, you don't know how to do stuff. And you're like, no, I'm not lazy at all. I work when I'm needed. And when I'm not needing to work, I go hang out the river. How's that lazy? I'm not sure that that's the right way to put it. And the consumer was considered undereducated and lacking palate. And I had a number of wine experts come challenge me frequently. When they would come in and say, none of you are qualified to judge. This is how you do this. And I said, well, you can't spit the shit out of your mouth, so exactly how does one judge without a tolerance? And they realized, I got you. You have to be a career user to actually be a judge, because the wine industry wanted to come in and take over the quantification of standards for cannabis. What makes good cannabis? How do we determine this? And they were going off of all this crap that has nothing to do with the bottom line, which is, how does it smoke? What's it do when it's inside you? It's a drug. They want to judge it like it's art. And they would devastate it. And I mean, they would send some brilliant people to just go at it with me. And I'd be like, you're not qualified. And they would be so offended. And then so they would then try to use special. And the bottom line is, we would say, well, let's judge it. Now smoke it and spit it out. And as soon as they took a puff on it, they were done. And they'd be like, all right, I don't know what I'm doing, because they're the juice area. And so, as soon as you smoke, he'd laugh. It's all right, don't worry about it, don't cry, it's gonna be all right. Yeah, I got a cot for you. You can lay down in the corner. And when you wake up, we'll go have some lunch. I gotta go back to work. But that's the reality of it. And so the problem is that, you've got to understand this, and most people, I've been very fortunate. I don't have this intuitively that I know. It's just that I was in such a public position unexpectedly that I just ran with it. And I said, well, fuck it, I'm here, I'm gonna go. If this is what it is, this is what it is. And it allowed me to be able to get exposed to so many monstrous individuals and so many different industrials. So I got to see all the different industries that wanted to come in and chop our world to pieces. I got to talk to the guys that own these companies. And I never expected it. I was quiet. I was always a career quiet guy. I wasn't a public guy. I'm actually shy in terms of, if we're hanging out, like we can talk about this, but I'm normal. I'm not the one at the club wearing the flashy shit dancing on the table. I'm kind of chill. But when I got in this one, I realized that I needed to make the most of this opportunity to get as much information as I could humanly gather, because I knew that it was the information that was going to allow me to survive, but I know also that me surviving is a failure because me isn't we. And there's a big difference. And so that's the reality of it. So the genetic selection process is just really an understanding of what you're facing as a farmer, and then how do you solve those issues, and how do you create a system that's going to allow you to succeed. And so I know this conversation, it goes all over the place, but it's really all about how do we use the material we have to succeed, and how do we determine it, and how do we utilize each other, and how do we figure out how to get products to market right now while we're developing products for the future, and how do we take the products that we've had historically and start to market them. Matter of fact, that should took off, but a friend of mine, one of the scientists from one of the bioscience companies said, hey, is there any way you can get a hold of people who were arrested in the past to find out are they still holding the cannabis in the hold at the jails? They only hold it for like six years as a hold time. So all my records got torn, like all the things that used to be from a case I was in are all gone now. They don't have any of those pieces. Because they wanted to get all this cannabis that had been confiscated so they could market to show that these cannabis varietals were in existence before these broad spectrum patents. So everyone's trying to figure out, you have all these people that are really morally conscious about the fact that we need the ability to have some form of genetic autonomy so we can survive. And right now, you have to limit what you do so that you can succeed while you're building your future and protecting yourself at the same time. And if you can work in conjunction with a team of you, where you work together, and I always say, work with a friend, but just make sure you know what friend means, somebody that you know, somebody that you trust. Me, same guys. I got the same guy I worked with the last 25 years. It's still the same guy I work with. I got the same crew. I'm someone who loves new friends, but I really like the ones I rolled with. And so I don't replace you for newer, sexier people when I no longer need you. You are right the way you are because I trust you, because I know what you're like when you have money, and I know what you're like when you don't. And I got to see you in those two contexts. I want to see how you treat the waiter. I want to see how you treat people that don't have value to you. Those type of things are things that we all have looked at intimately with each other. You trust a person. That's who you work with on this. And that person has friends they trust, and you can start to create this mycelium web of genetic success. And that's the way you're going to move through this system. So I think that covers this topic pretty good. And then we're going to get into we'll get some killer breeders here today. And we're going to get some conversations about, what drives them and what directions and inspirations. And because if you don't understand that, you don't understand why someone invested so much time into these things. And what it'll do is it'll help you understand how you're going to invest your time. And it starts to highlight the people of the industry that you're in, because everybody is being diminished. And so I'm known for doing a lot of this video work, but the thing that I think that one of the best video things I did was I did a breeder series interview where I took about 20 breeders that I selected because I believed that they were good people, and I paid for this whole thing to cover them. And people ask me, like, why are you not charging them for this production work? And I said, because they're people that I utilize in my business to gather material from, and I don't think a lot of them are gonna make it without some assistance, because the new world requires you to have a push. And I said, and I think I have a push. I said, I think that if I highlight them, it'll showcase their value, and it'll show that people like me that are known need people that aren't known, because without them I can't explore the edges of our galaxy. I'm not smart enough, I didn't work hard enough there, I didn't spend the time, I'm here. And all those people were very important. And what happened was, it absolutely resonated tremendously for all of them, and all of them, a bunch of them, were able to get contracts that let them tie into legal operations so they could run nursery projects, so they could continue their breeding. So it worked in a way that I didn't expect. I wanted the public to know who they were. I didn't realize what it was going to do for them financially. And what it did for people was it allowed them to see the breeders in an intimate fashion, so you can see people who are very myopic. They are in the picture, and you get to find out why. And so we're going to get a bunch of killer guys up here to talk about these type of things. And it's just always an honor for me to be around people like yourselves, which are my community, and for people who do all these diverse things that just let you always realize we don't really mean much without each other, and that we don't really know much without each other, but together we can do a lot. So thank you very much.
You guys want to do maybe 5-10 minutes of questions?
Anybody got
or
any
should we
questions
break?
you want to shoot, or?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. And I just want to say I really appreciate your perspective. It's really refreshing. Yeah, just thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you were talking earlier at the beginning about taking genetic material to different locations and then getting different results from the monoterpene expressions and whatnot. Have you found in your observation that my belief, and like a lot of people here, we talked about it this weekend, about the adaptogenic properties of cannabis, and their ability to kind of find its own equilibrium, or want to achieve its maximum genetic expression, wants to achieve that potential. Have you found that when you take something to another location, or something's been taken to another location, and maybe its monoterpenes were expressed differently in that first cycle or first time you ran it, are you finding that there's a improvement over time, or is those conditions like absolutely limiting?
I think that the conditions limit to a degree. I think what happens when you run a varietal in a specific location is you start to learn how to optimize the process to go along with it. So you're part of that process. And I think that we start to say, hey, what did we lose and what did we gain? And then you can make adjustments in your process. And I think that in a breeding project, now we can go take these directions the right way. But I think a lot of times, where the cultivar was selected from initially, especially if it was a good selection, if you did a good job and everything was correct the first time, you found where that plant absolutely wanted to be. And then when you move it, you don't get necessarily the same degree of quality. And what you'll be able to do is you'll say, hey, it wasn't as good as what we had, so then you'll grow it again, and you'll try to figure out how do you adjust those situations. And ultimately, you're going to find out it doesn't like to be in the interior. That it's still good grass, it's still killer, but it's not the same animal where it was.
If you don't make any adjustments, would you think the plant would kind of make its own internal adjustments to try to find its maximum genetic potential again? If it's required for our cultivation?
I think that the plant, it may want to express itself to a maximal, but the problem is the environment dictates the reality. And you can't get around that. So it's not going to be as awesome as, and it's perception of awesome. See, that's the thing, is it's going to reach its maximum potential based off of the influence of the environment on that plant, and the plant has enough genetic survivability that it's going to adapt to work to the best degree. But you're going to find an optimal place. And I always use myself as an example of, I don't do so well in the sun. You know, I got to wear a sun hat, and I better wear some stuff. I'm a killer in the snow, but no melanin. And no matter how much I spend time there, I'm not going to tan up enough to really make it work. You know?
Makes sense, thank you.
You're welcome.
You mentioned CRISPR earlier. Now, obviously, when you're talking about interspecies transfers, so obviously between different species, do you still think the same thing holds for intraspecies? So let's say if we were able to identify, as you said, with persistent breeding, a resistance trait, would it be, in your mind, different to be able to insert that into another cannabis strain via CRISPR technology instead of an elongated form of marker-assisted breeding, bring that into maintaining, obviously, the identical genetics, but with just that single marker?
But the thing is that we call it a single marker, but there's gene drag,
Yes.
right? So because of that drag, what we dragging out or what we dragging in? And I just think that, and it's just my opinion, I don't think we're that bright yet. I think that this is experimental. And I don't mind that. But I mind it when you're experimenting and then releasing it right into the system without any kind of idea what you're doing. And so you're going to see it because they're going to rush to get the better product, but they're also going to create things that they're not aware of that they did. They took away a resistance they didn't know, and all of a sudden a new pathogen comes out and wipes out every single plant that was edited. And you see it. Remember, I always use a banana as an example. You know how many bananas you eat? One. You want to know why? Because they all got wiped out from a pathogenic problem. And you want to know why they kept the Cavendish? Because it didn't require refrigeration. It didn't need refrigeration to be shipped. And so they said, hey, the one that survived is also economically viable. So you're all eating Cavendish banana because of this. But the corn blight, ask the Irish how the potato famine went. That's all the same thing. It's where you have too much connected genetic material, and then a pathogen comes in and devastates everything. And for me, I'm just like, when I'm running crops, I always run a little diversity, and I always have something called my insurance crop, which is basically bulletproof plants that no matter what we did, they just don't go. I have a location that I use that's cold and wet and dark. If it can do well there, it'll do well in terms of issues. And we find stuff that has higher resistance to pest pressure. So I go, it's not as marketable. I'm going to get less, but better than none. And so I'll always do a portion of my distribution is that. I do a distribution of the portion that is, so say like 100%, 15% is going to be high-end trendy. Risky, but trendy. So I'll get maximal money, but I won't run the whole run that. And then I'll go into the middle of this is a financial picture. I'll go to that middle section and say, these things are valuable and less risky, and then these things have no risk but less value. And I always make sure I put that one in there because we had a catastrophic storm a couple of years ago where out of the blue, in the middle of September, we got 4.5 inches of rain in about 15 minutes. And we had 85-mile-an-hour rains. And if you go online and go look at Northern California, and you're going to see all these plants that were 10, 12-pound plants wrapped in wire, rolling down the hills, ripped out of their cages. It just destroyed an entire region because nothing is meant to handle that kind of horrific storm pressure. And lo and behold, the plants that handled it, that I went through the farm and said, whoa, you are my storm backup. And so I always make sure I throw a portion of something as a survivability. And so that's the problem with this stuff is that I don't think we know it well enough. So we may have mapped the genome, we don't understand it. Just like we're going to get into people and start CRISPRing people. And I don't want to reproduce with you. Because for the rest of my genealogical time, as I'm a forecaster of the future, I'm a link in a genetic chain. Everyone after me is prone to some kind of genetic problem. That's a nightmare. You just wiped out your whole line.
Yeah, I like how you put it actually a few days ago, and that CRISPR tech is neat, but it's not necessary. So to the comment about interbreeding, like intergenetic species and plants with plants, I mean, we can get there, right? Through phenotypical sifting and through just genetic sifting, we can create that over time. And I mean, the vibe that I get in this room is we're all in it for the long run.
Yeah.
You know, it's not something we need.
That's what's the organic development.
Yeah.
And that's why I say only in rooms like this can you have these conversations, because you have people, you all took the time to come here to listen to people, you took time to listen to me. It means it matters.
Yeah.
You're trying.
To bring it back to the adaptogenic topic, I've been in food farming for a little bit now, and I'm quickly learning about the use of yams, and it's kind of a crazy thing, but it seems like genetically we haven't really been able to manipulate that profile without it wanting to revert back to its own natural state. And I've been kind of wrapping my head around the concept of CRISPR tech and weed that's being GMO'd, but I have a funny feeling that cannabis may actually fall in that realm as well. And as long as we start interbreeding our own genetic pools, even something that might not work in your area, I wonder how quickly the plant intelligence can kind of pick up on that environment and maybe create something within those phenotypes that expresses properly in your space.
As long as the material that you're adding is of quality, because of the concept of fetal regression.
Okay.
So fetal regression says that it will revert to the average of the inputs over time. And so that's why you want to make sure that you're always putting premium quality stuff in where that's the problem with most of the stock you're working with now, is it was sorted indoor.
Yeah.
So for the last 30 years, since mid-80s, you're working with stuff that was indoor, so it didn't have to have any survivability. And then we entered the world of chemical ag, to where we're using PGRs, fungicides, insecticides, and we've changed the plant on a genetic level because of that. And so now we're working with this inferior stock. So you have to that's why I love guys that do outdoor work. And as an example, people that do outdoor pollination. So when I do germ tests on companies, so I get all these, when I was moving all the seed stock, I would get stock from all the individuals I worked with, and I would do a germ test just so I knew what to expect from the customer's perspective. Were they gonna be happy? And I always give this guy Equilibrium Seeds out of Santa Cruz praise, because he always gave you more seeds than you needed, and they all germed. Because his work, he was one of the only guys, me and Gene's got a good rate too, but he's the only guy that did full-blown outdoor seed pollination. He did not do it inside. He went organic biology, he took it to fruition, and his plants literally launched. So he would give you way more seeds than you needed in the container, and you'd laugh because all of them would open up. And then they would all do beautifully, and I used to give the kid praise for that, because I said, hey, what you're doing is you're really showcasing what's possible by using the right situation to create what you're trying to create. And we're dealing with this super indoor model still, and we're having to scrub all this crap out of it. And as the plant goes back into biologically based cultivation systems, the genomic form will modify itself over time to re-establish that as its normal pattern. And then we'll be able to have high-quality cultivars to work to breed together so that the overall level is good. I used to tell people the reason why I put so much killer herb in the market for as many people as I pushed stuff into was because I wanted to smoke good bond. So if everybody I knew had good grass, then I could always smoke good bond. And it just seems so simple. And then I have a friend who's a phenomenal dog breeder, and he's like, fetal regression. He said, you always have to make sure that the stuff that you're putting in is as high quality as possible, because over time, left to itself, it'll reach the average of what's there. And so if you can increase the overall quality, the average is always higher. Any question?
We've noticed a lot of intersex traits are actually stress testing our males, and I wonder why it's something I hear more about.
It's a survival response, and and you can't test for it genetically, so like you can find out a lot of information, but stress-induced pollination issues, that's one you can't pick up. And so that's the one where you have to put them through the work and find out, will this thing blow intersex? And for me, once it does it, period, I call it. Because it's deadly to the farmer. It just is. Someone said, no, you just gotta keep an eye on it, you gotta go through, and you gotta go catch the manner, and you gotta pull it off, and you gotta do this, and I'm like, but I'm told you got a lot of weed. How the hell do you do that? And so I give an example, because I had a stunning cutting for Bodie, and Bodie's a good breeder, and he's about it. But I had a stunning varietal from him that just made some of the best concentrate you could ever imagine. The terp quality of it was phenomenal, stunning plant. But what we found was when we had a drought and high heat period where there was water issues and too much excessive heat, that plant threw out a limb and basically blew a whole side of the field with pollen. And up to that point, we didn't realize it. So then I said, oh, I got you. Under those circumstances, it'll do that. That's deadly to me. I need stuff that's basically bulletproof. If it doesn't work under shitty conditions, I don't want it. Because I know that in my life, I'm gonna get them. I don't live in a vacuum, man. I live in the real world. And everyone's like, if we do all this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I know, you got a $80 million indoor operation, that's nice. We're not in the same situation at all right now. So I it's true, So I with all the buffers and the things and the spray and the when I do mold tests, same thing. I call it run it dry. I put the plants out and they get no assistance, no FPJ, nothing on top, nothing. I want to know, do they handle it? And when I want to test out botrytis, I take a garden hose and I spray them all down. Oh, you all rotted, you're done. Because when I'm hunting stuff that absolutely will work for me as a farmer. I don't have time to fail. I can't afford to fail. And if I put material like that into your hands, you'll fail. Me collecting, I have a killer collection of varietals. They're collected. Someone asked me, what does your collection reflect? I said, financial success. And they go, I said, yeah, the stuff that I keep for myself because I love the smoke, but everything else is something that if I was forced to use it outside, I could get paid. Meaning that the market wants it. The chemovar is sexy, the cultivar is sexy. I'm good. And I'm rigorous about that one, personally. I'm just like, I don't want to have to hope and pray that we don't have those problems, because I just never have it work out, Anybody else? What you got?
I have a question comment, one of those question comments that relates to documentation of plants for the protection of the plants and how it relates to what's going on with CRISPR and Cas9. And it's something that we are talking about a lot at the Cannabis Project, and I'm interested.
Do you know who she is?
Can we wait and give you 20 minutes to do after this, after we take a break? Let's real quick.
Okay.
Because that's from the Open Cannabis Project, and it's
Okay.
about open sourcing material for protecting your plants from being taken from you. And I think that it would be probably best if you were able to just throw something out. So this way, she's really, really solid, and she's going to give you some good info.
Let's take a break during.
Let's take a break.
10 minutes, we'll come back and we'll come back. We'll work on questions from the guests.
Okay, guys, here we are back at Pinnacle. Hey, so we're gonna take a break. I'm gonna upload this because it's gonna take forever to upload it if I don't upload it now, and then I'll go back live for the second half of the conference. And you guys are gonna be totally excited because there is freaking here. Okay, so love y'all. Have a great day. Please share.